Hello and welcome, and in these next few videos we're going to take a quick look at some scripting. So let's see what I've got set up for us here today. So I've started by deploying a mini hack environment, really just so that I can get one of the Kali machines. That's all I really care about, is just getting a Kali environment, and it's inside the Kali environment that I'm going to be using this as a good platform for us to test with. Something I do like about this as well is that the Kali environment specifically drops us into a sandbox account, not into the root account. And so if you are going to be practicing some of this stuff, we will want to notice some of the nuances between what happens as we're practicing some of our scripting as root versus what happens when we're practicing as just a non-root user. So sandbox user that is a sudo-enabled account, but not a root account, is something that will be part of what we're looking at here today. So part of the goal, of course, though, is we want to take a look at what is it like to make some basic scripts, and ideally take some of the knowledge we already have from previous commands and other parts about our system and start applying it in perhaps an automated or more intelligent way. That, of course, is when we start unlocking the power of scripting and seeing what we can really do with our bash system. And so why don't we try that? Why don't we try one of the most classic examples of creating a script and getting it running and seeing what the pieces are all about? I'll just start by making a brand new file here. That's where we'll get going with this. So maybe I'll create that file with touch, something like this, say like touch, my first script .sh. And a lot of times you'll see that your shell scripts oftentimes end in a .sh. That's a typical file extension for this. So sure, touch my first script. I've got a new file in my home directory, and let's go ahead, use your favorite editor, whether you use Nano or VI or Vim or whatever. Let's go ahead and just open this up and see what it looks like to be able to modify this. So an important thing about our scripts, whenever we're making a shell script, the very first line of the script is what we should use as an interpreter to tell what shell we're actually going to be running the script as. So some of your typical options are to put a shebang line, which is to put your hashtag or your pound and then an exclamation point. And then you would put the file path to the shell that you intend this to execute as. Now, a lot of times the most common examples would be to do something like /bin/bash, which that's where the actual bash shell is located. You could also just do something like /bin/sh, and that will use a default shell or whatever shell has actually been assigned to your system. You'll find that a lot of people just sort of have their built-in preferences. Sometimes sh calls bash because that will be the default shell in an Ubuntu system, for example. But for most of the stuff that we're doing here, it's really not going to matter because the basic commands that we're using are pretty universal across all shells. So whether you put sh or whether you put bash on your first line doesn't really matter. But that is what this first line of our script is actually going to be doing. And so what that's telling the system is that, okay, take all the available commands that in this case are built into /bin/bash, and let's go ahead and run them as the programmer, as you, the person writing this script, goes and calls them throughout the script. And so I think it's a pretty classic example to say, how do I get it to do the most classic things, such as hello world? And so we could say that. We could say that just using a basic echo command, right? If I was at the terminal running commands to have it say hello world, an echo command would be a perfectly valid way to do that. So I could write out echo space and then something like hello world, sure. And this will give us our classic example of what it looks like to run an effective script as well as have some data in it and have it actually execute some commands. So simple as can be when we're working with our bash system to be able to make a script to do the classic hello world. Sure, let's quit out of this. We could say Control X, Y, enter, or escape :WQ if you happen to be working with Vim. And an important thing to check here when we have our scripts is to realize when we made this brand new file, we did it with Nano or Touch or whatever, is to check the permissions. All right, so if we do an ls-l to check our permissions here in our home directory, we'll see I do have this my first script that I created, but by default, when you make brand new files, it does not come with the execute permission. And so it is a good habit to get into after creating your files, give them the proper permissions so then they would be something that could be executed like a program. All right, and so two classic ways to be able to do that, of course, using the chmod command would be a good one to be able to change your permissions, chmod. Personally, I always have a preference of learning the number method. So learning something like the numbers like 755, which was covered in a previous video, how you could take some, using chmod to be able to modify your permissions sort of one by one. But something like 755 would give everyone execute permission, both you, the group, as well as everyone else. And then, of course, you would have the file path of the thing that you want to modify the permissions to. Chmod 755 of my first script.sh, sure. And now when I run my ls-l again, What we should notice is I've added in the execute permission, so I could now execute this since it actually contains some code. And you'll start to see how a lot of systems start to color code things. And green is the classic color that we'll start to see for things that have the execute permission, things that might be a program and contain some code. So sure. So this is some of our basic steps. We have the step one of create the file, put that shebang line on the very first line and start writing out the code that you want to put in here to have your script execute. After you've done that, give yourself execute permissions. And then the last step, of course, is how do I actually execute the script? How do I run the script? And the way that we can run scripts in Bash is to be able to just call the file path. You call the file path to where the script actually is. And so if you think about it like this, if I type ls, it's built into Bash to go find the ls command and then run the ls command. Right? So in other words, this is kind of going to a location and running the ls command when I just type ls. We want the same effect, but I want it to be like for the my first script, but Bash doesn't know where this is because this is a custom script that we made. It's not something your shell automatically knows about, and so you have to give the file path to it. That's kind of what's going on here. You give the file path to the script and it will execute the script. And so this is a classic way that you'll see the internet tell you how to do this, which is it'll oftentimes say you put a dot and then a slash, and then you would type the name of your script. And so I've seen tons of websites that say this. They say when you want to execute a script, type dot slash myfirstscript.sh. And if you remember, I did mention this in a previous video. It's because the dot is short for your current directory. So you actually are giving the full file path to where your script is located when you write the dot. All right, so it says my current directory slash my first script. You're effectively calling the file path though. Sure, and if I've got the permissions right and I haven't made any typos, I run my script, it goes and uses the bash shell and executes the code that was inside, which was just echo hello world. And life is good.